Hello, storytellers. My name is Madie. Welcome to Bound by Words. If we haven't met yet, I am a freelance editor and fantasy writer, and I am accepting manuscripts for the fall. I also post writing-related videos twice a week, occasionally some reading content, and writing vlogs during NaNoWriMo. So if you're interested in any of that, then please consider subscribing. Today we are talking about 5 ways to write realistic fear in writing. And I'm really excited about this, how to write emotion series that we've sort of casually been doing, because I think it's what makes writing and reading an immersive experience. It's one of the reasons that you really get sucked into a story, is because you can really relate to the emotions. So today we are going to talk about 5 ways to make that fear really relatable in books. So the number one way to write fear more realistically in your books is to show and not tell. And you hear this all the time. We hear show, don't tell, but stories should really be a balance between showing and telling. How much do you show and how much do you tell? I think strong emotion, any kind of overwhelming emotion that you want your readers to connect to, is something that you should show. If you tell your readers that your character's scared, then not only are they not going to connect, but they might not even believe you, because fear is not something that we can normally name right away. Most feelings you can't really name right away. If you're afraid, there's a chance that you're actually going to experience some suspicion first. For example, if you're walking alone at night and you think somebody is following you and, you start to get the heebie-jeebies from that, you're not going to see them there and immediately feel fear. You're not going to be able to name it like that. You're probably going to get a little bit suspicious first. You're going to notice them, then you might take a left turn and then a right turn and see if they're still following you, and then you'll start to get a little bit suspicious of why they're following you, and you might try to rationalize it a little bit, they might just be going in the same direction. Very rarely will somebody actually just experience fear sudden onset. So you want to make sure that you write it realistically, write it the way that we would experience fear in the real world, and that is by showing the things that build up into the fear, showing the concern, showing the suspicion. You can use physical traits of feeling fear as a way to really show your readers that your characters are scared. For example, does your heart race? Does your chest feel tight? Do you feel just a little bit overwhelmed? Some people might experience tunnel vision whenever they have fear. So incorporating those types of sensory feelings will really draw your reader in and make a more realistic fear experience. The second thing is being aware of how people treat their fear. Specifically, a lot of people deny being scared. A lot of the times, even in various degrees of fear, people will deny that they're scared even if it's something really small, almost especially if it's something that's really small. The times when people are going to openly admit being scared are when they are truly terrified and they feel like they have to make sure you know that. Up until that point, most people will deny fear to a certain extent. So if your character is afraid of the dark, they might try to be brave and just keep it to themselves. If they are afraid of walking alone somewhere, then they might try to coordinate somebody to walk with them. If they're afraid of eating certain foods or certain experiences, whatever it is, they might not always just openly admit that they're afraid. And if that happens in a story, you can come across as being a little bit fake. So make sure that your character has the appropriate amount of deniability when it comes to fear that will also lend to the realistic experience of it. Tip number 3 is to use suspense. Use other things, and we sort of talked about this a little bit in tip number 1 about showing, but use other storytelling tactics to make your fear drawn out. Fear isn't something you experience suddenly, which is why we want to do that show, not tell. We really want our readers to be invested in it. But on top of that, fear is not something that happens quickly. That progression from, acknowledging something to being suspicious of something to starting to become afraid of it, that's going to be a slower progression, maybe exponentially. So you don't want to just rush into fear. So this might happen with foreshadowing. For example, if somebody's terrified of spiders. I know a really common example is Ron Weasley from Harry Potter. In the one book, it actually says early on in the book several times, and in the movie, that he's scared of spiders, and then that becomes important later. So you can sow your fear in a little bit quicker, whether it's fear of a certain aspect of an adventure or fear of a certain interaction in your story. That way that it's in the reader's mind, even if it's not present in the story yet. But when it comes to right around the point of fear, make sure you're using suspension and tension and maybe even stakes there. You know, what does the character think they're gonna lose? Make sure that's really clear and don't rush through it. Nothing will ruin a scene of fear like being rushed through, especially if you're writing horror or thriller or suspense, you know, like it's in the title there, the suspense. But if your character is rushed through that emotion, it might not feel realistic and the readers might not really believe it or connect to it. So make sure that you slow down the pacing when we experience things like fear. But the funny thing is even though we're slowing down the pacing so that takes a little bit of time, you're really going to feel a lot more tension during that period. That's where like the heart palpitating and chest tightness feels. We want to feel the anxiety that the character is going through in their state of fear. Tip number 4 for writing realistic fear in your novels is to remember your fight, flight, or freeze response. But not only that, know that a character's response might not actually be something that they normally would do or that we would normally expect from them. It's very frequent for characters to react in ways that they normally never would whenever they are afraid. By characters, I also just mean people. So that fight, flight, or freeze, sometimes it's predictable. Sometimes you have somebody who's just quiet or shy, and it makes a whole lot of sense that they, you know, freeze in the face of danger or fear. But you might also have a character who's really loud and outgoing, who is always really bubbly and personable, and as soon as they become afraid, they shut down. So make sure you're utilizing that fight, flight, or freeze response, and also play around with what type of response, and if the response was different, how that would affect your character and how your readers might relate to the character. A lot of us want to write these really unique and memorable characters, and maybe, you know, maybe we have enough macho military-like men in our fantasy adventure stories who fight everything at the quickest whiff of fear. Maybe we need, you know, a big macho military-like man who freezes. Or maybe their first response is to get away. So I've mentioned in passing in vlogs and stuff, but I've been working on jitsu for a few months, not very good at it yet, but I really love it as a sport. But one of the things that teachers always go over whenever we're learning like new drills, or even if it's just like an attack or a defense normally, is like, this is what we would do in a sports competition way to be aggressive, and this is what we would do to get away. And I think it's really like brought it more to my attention how infrequent it is that characters, especially in like fantasy and books, how frequently they run from things that they are scared of. And we say that a lot in haunted houses, like, don't go towards the noise, don't go into the basement, you know, get yourself out of this scary situation. So writing realistic fear is writing a response that your readers aren't going to be shocked, surprised, or confused whenever the character does that thing. You know, we want them to be shocked, surprised, and confused about where the story's going, but we don't want them to be really surprised that the character is all of a sudden acting like an idiot. Unless you're using that for some reason for some plot development. So remember to acknowledge and utilize the fight, flight, or fear responses across your characters. Tip number 5 on how to write realistic fear is to not forget why your characters are afraid. It could be something small and seem silly, or it can be something that is drastically life-changing, but there should always be a why. There should be a logic behind your character's fear. Even if the logic is, you know, this happened once, or I heard a story where this happened, and I don't want it to happen to me. The difference between fear and phobia is fear usually has a logical cause, and phobia is an irrational fear, is a fear with no cause. So if somebody has just a phobia, like how we said earlier, like a phobia of spiders for no reason other than they're creepy or gross, that's a little bit different than writing fear and writing fear realistically. And if you have that suspenseful build-up and your pacing slowed down, but like your tension went through the roof and we're really sitting next to the character and feeling exactly what they're feeling, there should be a why. If you're doing all of those other things, it's almost impossible to like execute that without a why. But if you do have a scene where you want the fear to be like a little bit more deep, or maybe you just feel like that scene needs a lot of growth, a good place to check is the why. Is the why they're scared justifying the way that they're acting, and are they scared enough? For example, if they're suddenly very scared of something, and it does have a why, but if they're very, very scared of a why that is sort of minuscule and it seems a little bit trivial, then that's going to feel a little bit fake or forced. So we want to make sure if it's like a little Y that we have a little like mild to moderate amount of fear, but if it's a big Y then we can justify a bigger amount of fear. If you enjoyed this video or learned anything from it, make sure you give it a thumbs up and please consider subscribing. I post writing related videos twice a week, sometimes some reading content and NaNoWriMo vlogs during the NaNoWriMo months. If you need any edits, my website's down below, but if you need to get a hold of me just to chat, Instagram is the best place to do that. And with that, I'll see you guys next time.